Behind the escalating banking crisis that we're facing, there are a lot of deep state machinations that you need to know about and understand, or we will inevitably fall victim to their schemes. Stay tuned and I'll tell you more. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Behind the Deep State. I'm Alex Newman, your host. Thank you for joining us today here at the New American. Now, last week, in recent days, we've had some mega problems with the banking system. We had the second largest bank failure in U.S. history as the Federal Reserve keeps raising interest rates, thereby undermining the value of the bonds that these banks are holding. Could the panic spread and result in a broader run on the banks? Absolutely. Would the deep state like to see a panic and a run on the banks? Possibly. So there's a lot of different elements to this. I'm going to try to tackle as many as we can today. We may have to do a part 2 next week. But I want to start off by pointing out that this bank was just an absolute cesspool of Democrat corruption. One of the largest banks, 16th largest bank in America. Of course, it went belly up. Regulators came in. But there's a lot more to this story, right? This is a bank that was just doing all kinds of crazy things. It was funneling all sorts of money to Democrat politicians. In fact, employees at the bank were mega donors for the Democrats. Almost all their contributions went to Democrats, by the way. People like Joe Biden. Also, the PACs affiliated with the DNC. So they were also funneling money to communist Chinese tech startups. So as if that wasn't bad enough, it seems like the donors to the Democrats actually sold off a lot of their stock holdings in the bank before the rest of the public found out. It'd be nice if the insider trading laws were enforced fairly, but I can assure you they won't be because, of course, the SEC is in the hands of corruptocrats. Now, another interesting thing about this bank, they had no head of risk assessment for a full 9 months before the bank collapsed. Their woke boss for Europe, Middle East, and Africa was out there organizing pride campaigns and lesbian visibility days and was so proud of, her name was Jay Raspa. She actually describes herself not as a her, but as a genderqueer person of color from a working class background. And she had a lot of time to work on LGBT stuff and diversity stuff and pride stuff and safe space stuff. She said she could not be prouder of the work SVB was doing to serve underrepresented entrepreneurs. Yeah, interesting. Now, there are other banks that are already in trouble. 2 others have already been taken over. First Republic, as we're doing this episode, looks like it's in mega trouble. If you look at their own documents, right? If you look at their call report, shows the estimated uninsured deposits. We're talking about almost $120 billion, although Joe Biden and company have now stepped in and said basically they're just going to put taxpayers on the hook for everything. Another document from First Republic, the 10K SEC filing, shows the bank's deposits and geographic exposure and basically Silicon Valley, San Francisco, etc. Now, there's a big chance that this bank may still fail, even with all the measures that the government and the Federal Reserve took. But, folks, this is a really, really serious thing to be understanding. And if some more of these go down, it could get even crazier. Now, also, just recently, there was a really interesting suicide. A billionaire financier, Thomas Lee, he was once described as the envy of Wall Street. He was just found in his bathroom with a gunshot wound to the head and his Smith & Wesson gun next to him, according to police. And this may well be, folks, the canary in the coal mine for financial issues that we may see coming out over the next few months and maybe the next few years. Behind the scenes stuff is happening. Could banks freeze credit lines? Absolutely. Could financial institutions demand bigger margin requirements? Absolutely. Could banks start demanding more collateral? Absolutely, folks. And so by spring, we might see some very interesting things happening. But there's a lot happening behind the scenes, too, that I want to focus on as well. Now, the criminal banking cartel, calling itself the Federal Reserve, and we'll spend some time on this, they're very rapidly shrinking the supply of currency. They've done this before. They flood the economy with funny money, right? Since the last economic crisis, we've had preposterously low interest rates in this country. In some cases, close to 0%, just flooding the world with funny money. And so what happened? Well, asset prices went crazy. It became very easy for grifters to make a lot of money. It became very easy for companies to start dumb projects that they never would have started if interest rates were determined by the market rather than by the clown Central Planning Committee at the Federal Reserve Bank. And so when they've done this before, when they've flooded the world with funny money with low interest rates and then sucked it all back in and reduced the supply of currency, what has happened every time is a depression and massive job losses. And so we saw that in the Great Depression. We had the Roaring Twenties, where the Federal Reserve, and then they were still, at least on paper, tied to gold. They flooded the economy with funny money, interest rates way too low, way too long. And then they started sucking it all back out. And what happened? The economy collapsed. People couldn't pay their mortgages. Businesses couldn't pay their loans. The mega bankers stepped in and started buying everything up for pennies on the dollar. Could that happen again? Absolutely, it could, and it may well. We'll get into a little more depth on how the Federal Reserve does what it does in a moment. There's also some really troubling news coming out of the Federal Reserve and the Treasury. According to Congressman Thomas Massie, during a hearing, he was asked, a Democrat senator asked the Federal Reserve and Treasury officials if there was a program in place to censor social media to prevent bank runs. And according to Congressman Thomas Massie, the answer was, "We will get back to you on that." Turns out, there are already efforts in place on that. The Department of Homeland Security has been working for a long time to censor disinformation and misinformation involving finances. You could see the letter. This comes from CISA, C-I-S-A. They're calling this critical infrastructure, and therefore they want to say it could be like a cyber attack, and then they could be able to censor what people are allowed to say. Now, that in and of itself is very troubling. When you realize that this is the same agency that said the 2020 election was the most secure in American history, you realize we are dealing with some either total idiots, which, trust me, they're not idiots, or some people who are up to no good. And I suggest to you that they are up to no good. Now, to try to stave off this threat of a bank run, the Federal Reserve has, and they may well have been trying to stoke fears of a bank run, right? I think they want to collapse the smaller banks. I think they want to collapse the regional credit unions. They want to get everybody to put their money into these woke mega banks, Bank of America, J.P. Morgan, right? These criminal, just absolutely wicked banks that will cancel you for being a conservative, that don't want to do business with you if you're involved in the gun business, that want to spend investor money and shareholder money on LGBT trainings and nonsense like this. So the Federal Reserve announced that they were going to be printing basically infinite money if necessary. They announced the creation of this new bank term funding program, another ridiculous acronym, BTFP. And in the press release, they said, and I'm quoting here from their press release, "To support American businesses and households, the Federal Reserve Board on Sunday announced that it will make available additional funding to eligible depository institutions to help assure banks have the ability to meet the needs of all their depositors. This action will bolster the capacity of the banking system to safeguard deposits and ensure the ongoing provision of money and credit to the economy." Or it will put taxpayers on the hook for potentially unlimited amounts of money to the billionaire friends of the Democrats, while serving the purpose of helping to further divert money out of the smaller banks, out of the regional credit unions, and into the mega banks. Even if it didn't do that, it would still, of course, lead to disaster. You may have heard the term moral hazard. This is where the government steps in and removes the consequences of making really dumb decisions. That's one of the things that helped lead up to the 2007-2008 crisis. And what they've done here is they've just doubled down on this, right? The FDIC was insuring deposits up to $250,000. Now they're going to basically insure it up to unlimited, at least for certain eligible financial institutions. And so what is that going to do? These mega bankers will then say, this is great. We can earn huge bonuses if we risk everything on dumb bets. And if we lose, no problem, right? We'll just have the sucker taxpayers bail us out. Joe Biden will hand us money, or the Federal Reserve will print money. Right? This is incredibly dangerous, folks. You couldn't ask for a better way to get banks to do really, really dumb things. It's exactly what they'll do. Now, even just the fact that the FDIC is going to now be insuring all these additional deposits, obviously that's going to cost you, right? Somebody has to pay for this. It will come in the form of bank fees and other things. Yet you, Mr. Bank customer, will get the bill. But folks, this is really, really dangerous. It is socialism. It's a bailout. And we need to recognize that, right? And again, I think there is an effort to move us into the big mega banks. And I think part of the reason they want to do that is because they think that the big mega banks, and a lot of them are already working on these testing projects, the Citibanks, the Bank of Americas, the Wells Fargos, et cetera. They're already working on pilot tests for central bank digital currencies. We did a whole episode on central bank digital currencies. We warned you about this. This really means the end of financial privacy, the end of freedom. And once your social credit score comes into play, if your social credit score is too low, they might just cancel you entirely. And, they probably won't ban cash immediately because they need to work out the bugs in the system and so on. But there's a very real possibility. In fact, I would say a certainty that this is their ultimate objective. They'll introduce CBDCs side-by-side cash, and then eventually they'll eliminate cash. You may remember that episode. If you didn't watch it, I want to show you just a little clip from the managing director of the Bank for International Settlements, which is kind of like the tip of the pyramid, if you will, when it comes to the global New World Order financial system they want to build. And he's bragging about how great CBDCs are going to be if you want to have total control over everybody, the way money is spent, et cetera. Watch.
Now, in all our analysis on CBDC, in particular for the use of general use, we tend to establish the equivalence with cash. And there is a huge difference there. For example, in cash, we don't know, for example, who's using a $100 bill today. We don't know who is using a 1,000 peso bill today. A key difference with the CBDC is that central bank will have absolute control on the rules and regulations that will determine the use of that expression of central bank liability. And also we will have the technology to enforce that. Those two issues are extremely important, and that makes a huge difference with respect to what cash is.
So there you go, folks. CBDCs are incredibly, incredibly dangerous. This is a tool of total control. It's the Great Reset, the New World Order crowd. They want to control every single dollar that's spent. They want to track every single dollar that's spent. And ultimately, if you won't participate, right, and you may already have your 18 boosters, or are we on 19? I can't remember anymore. You may already have your boosters, and you may think this isn't, concern to you. But what happens when they mandate booster number 342? Right? What happens when they start mandating other injections? What happens when they start mandating that you don't read your Bible anymore, or that you don't give money to church anymore? These things are not hypothetical, folks. This is the direction that they want to go, and they're doing it very rapidly. And we need to understand, too, these bailouts of the banks, what they're doing here is essentially making the banks and the government one, right? This is like fascism. This is absolutely outrageous. It should not be happening in America. But, of course, Joe Biden says everything's fine, and so nothing to worry about.
Americans can have confidence that the banking system is safe.
All right, folks. In the last few minutes, I want to talk a little bit about the boom and bust cycle, okay? The fake economists, the Keynesians, the neo-Keynesians, they want you to think that this is just a natural cycle. It just happens, and nobody really understands it. And as long as the government spends a lot of money whenever there's a recession, then everything's going to work out fine. That is, in my view, a deeply flawed view. Now, I think the Austrians got it right. People like Ludwig von Mises, wonderful economist, wrote Human Action and some other things. And what these economists have explained is that really this is something that's caused by monetary policy. So they flood the economy with money with below market interest rates, and then you get what? A lot of economic activity. There's more jobs, companies are expanding, et cetera. But the reality is these lower interest rates were not justified by the fundamentals, right? In a free market, interest rates would come from the supply of loanable funds. That's basically the savings that people have, right? That would be the supply of money that's available for lending out. And then on the other side would be the demand for loanable funds. And so that's where you'd get the price of money, which is called an interest rate. In a free market, interest rates would be set by the market. They'd be set by supply and demand for loanable funds. In our rigged, fascistic, communistic market, we have a clown car of central bankers that determine these things. We think inflation should be 2%, so we're going to increase interest rates, or we're going to decrease interest rates, right? We all know central planning doesn't work. If you don't believe me, go to Cuba, go to Venezuela, go to the Soviet Union, go to Vietnam, go to Angola, go to Mozambique. I mean, we've seen this movie before. And yet, somehow, Americans have been convinced that the most important single price in the entire economy, the price of money, should be determined by a central planning committee of an institution that is essentially a banking cartel, a cartel of private bankers that have managed to seize control of our money system, of our credit system. What could go wrong, right? And so these central planners, they lower interest rates below where they should be. You get a lot of economic activity. That's the boom phase of the boom and bust phase. Then you get the bust phase, right? The bust is where they start sucking money out of the economy, right? Inflation's getting too high. We heard that. We got to raise interest rates. Oh, whoops. Okay. So they raise interest rates all high. And then what happens? People can't pay their mortgages. People can't pay their bills. People start getting fired. Nobody's got any disposable income anymore. And the economy basically gets sucked into a black hole. So this is the business cycle in a nutshell, right? In a free market, these kinds of things would not really happen like this. But in this manipulated economy that we have, this is what happens. Now, there are some other issues. We may have to do a whole episode on that, but you've got the fractional reserve banking, right? The way commercial banks do lending would be unfathomable to your average person. There's very little understanding of this, and that's how they're able to get away with this. But what happens basically when you go deposit your money in the bank, they lend out most of that. The Federal Reserve sets what's called the reserve requirement ratio, where you have to have, sometimes it's 5%, 10%, 15, 20% of your deposits in reserve. And so what happens is the commercial banking sector is actually creating new money, very similar to the way the Federal Reserve creates new money. They create it as credit with interest attached. And so the Federal Reserve creates money out of thin air. They loan it out into the economy at interest, right? They buy treasury bonds, for example. And then the government or whoever gets the money, the banks, start spending that into the economy, and it works its way through. Well, guess what? The Federal Reserve created the principal. They didn't create the interest. So what happens when it's come times to pay the principal and the interest? Well, that money was not created. And so what happens? You end up in a debt trap where you have to create new money to be able to pay back the old loans for the fake money that they created before. So you're actually in a debt trap. And if they stop creating new money, if they stop spending ridiculous amounts of money, the whole economy gets sucked into a black hole. But guess what? If they keep doing the same thing, the whole economy will get destroyed as well. Look at Zimbabwe, look at Venezuela, look at the Weimar Republic, look at Hungary during the hyperinflationary period. It always leads to disaster. So what we really need here is to get the deep state out of our monetary system, get the deep state out of setting these policies, and go back to a true free market based on sound and honest money. I have a feeling we're going to have to revisit this subject soon, but the important thing to know is the deep state here is manipulating the economy. They've got objectives. They want to smash the economy. You can't build back better unless you smash what exists. They can't move us into a central bank digital currency unless there's a crisis sufficient for the purpose. We did a whole episode recently on how they plan to use crises to bring about these changes that they've been advocating. So, folks, the deep state is up to no good. They always are. Don't believe the fake media. They're always lying to you. Send this to other people who need, basic primer on what exactly is going on. And finally, educate yourself, but then educate others. Talk to your congressman, talk to your state representative. There are things that states can do right now to help protect themselves from the calamities that the deep state has planned. Legalize gold and silver as legal tender. Is one good thing you can do. Texas actually has a state bullion depository now. There's a lot of great things that states can and are doing to protect themselves from the coming financial tsunami that these globalists are planning to unleash on us. But step one is understanding, right? We've got to understand what's happening here. If we don't, we will fall for their lies. We will be duped, just like so many people were during the can't say the word because YouTube fascists might censor us, but you know what I'm talking about a few years ago. Yeah, right. So don't fall victim to their scheming. Get some education, share this with others, and make some preparations. I'm Alex Newman. This is Behind the Deep State. Thank you so much for tuning in. Until next time, God bless you all.
Sophia paused before the door. It read, Department of Digital Convergence. Just inside was a new world, a better world, the one of everlasting life, of no pain, of no loss, of no problem. She entered the chamber and her surroundings changed. She saw around her an infinite field of waving golden grain surmounted by cloudless blue sky. The AI voice whispered gently in her mind, Welcome to the singularity. She couldn't see it and couldn't feel it, but her body had almost instantly been covered by a swarm of tiny gray multi-legged bots that melted through her clothes and into her skin. Not perceiving the nightmare, her eyes had already been consumed and the rest of her body was dissolving as the bots digested her flesh. She felt only a warmth suffusing her being. Drowsy, she drifted to sleep, and her last thought was one of panic. Would she ever wake? Could a nightmare vision like this be an outcome of the much-hyped transhumanist technological singularity? Enter the world of the future as illuminated by the experience of the past in Endgame, the new book by Dennis Barrett, the publisher of the New American Magazine, and find out how the disastrous COVID pandemic response fits with the technocratic elite's thirst to create a transhumanist utopia. Get Endgame from shopjbs.org with free shipping with code ENDSHIP, ENDSHIP. Or get Endgame and the Great Reset Collector's issue of the New American Magazine and get free shipping plus an additional 20% off both with code N20, END20.